introduction.
Oh,
Could I have a little introduction?
Mr. Paul will introduce the witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thomas Woods is a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. He graduated from Harvard University and received his master's and PhD from Columbia University. He is the author of 9 books, of which 2 were New York Times bestseller, including Meltdown, A Free Market Look at Why the Stock Market Collapsed. He also won a prize in 2006, the 2006 Templeton Enterprise Awards for his book, The Church and the Market. Dr. Woods is also a contributing editor of the American Conservative. I welcome Dr. Woods as a witness before this committee.
Please, Dr. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Paul, other members of the committee. Let me begin my summary of my written testimony in support of H.R. 1207 by recalling a controversy that erupted in late 2008. Bloomberg News ran a headline, "Fed Defies Transparency Aim and Refusal to Disclose," and the article dealt with trillions of dollars in loans whose recipients and whose collateral that had been put up were unknown to the American people. The editor-in-chief of Bloomberg News, Matthew Winkler, stated it very simply. He said, "Taxpayers, involuntary investors in this case, have a right to know who received loans, in what amounts, for which collateral, and why specific loans were made." Well, he's right, of course. There's no good reason for Americans not to know the terms and recipients of these loans. There's likewise no good reason for them to be kept in the dark about the Fed's arrangements with foreign governments and foreign central banks. These things affect the quality of the money that in our system Americans are obliged to accept. Now, this seems like common sense. So what are some of the common arguments that have been raised against 1207? Well, it would compromise the Fed's independence. And eventually, if we open the books, this will lead inexorably to some kind of influence over monetary policy being exercised by Congress. I think this is a red herring. The bill neither envisions nor calls for any such thing. In fact, the bill is not designed to have Congress have any authority over setting interest rate targets or any such thing as that. This is part of the Fed's central planning apparatus, and it's best to keep this away from the Fed or Congress, in my judgment. But ultimately, all we're doing is looking to open the books. Congress has a moral and legal responsibility to keep tabs on and keep the public informed about the various creatures it brings into existence. So these various convoluted scenarios by which merely opening the books will eventually lead to a floodgate of an inflationary catastrophe at the hands of an uppity Congress, I think are a little over the top. Now, at the same time, we hear this objection all the time about the Fed's independence, so we should investigate that issue. How independent is the Fed? Well, how independent could it be if the Fed chairman is, of course, routinely up for reappointment? The chairman typically wants to ingratiate himself into the favor of the president and often will accommodate him with loose monetary policy. Moreover, try to imagine a Fed chairman who doggedly insisted on maintaining the value of the dollar, even if it meant refusing to monetize a massive deficit to fight a war or so-called stimulate a depressed economy. You can't imagine it. So if there is any truth to the idea of Fed independence, it's in precisely this, that the Fed, as we've seen in recent years and months, has the ability to extend trillions of dollars to unidentified recipients on undisclosed terms. Now, if that's what we're talking about, I find it hard to imagine any self-respecting American who isn't bought and paid for hesitating for a minute to challenge that. Now, we've also heard that this type of legislation might politicize lender of last resort decisions. Well, again, it does no such thing. You'll find nothing in the text of the bill to justify that suspicion. But even if it did, how is this a departure from current practice? I think most Americans, you're going to have a hard time persuading them that the decisions made regarding the various bailouts were all made entirely with an eye to the public good and entirely disinterested and were not political at all. I think some Americans, and this ranges from progressives all the way to traditional conservatives, have rather a different thesis in mind, which is that, for instance, Goldman Sachs just might have a little more political pull than the rest of us. Well, let me also make clear that supporters of this bill are not interested in a watered-down version of the bill. This would only further stimulate suspicion that somebody is hiding something. Now, it seems to me the audit is coming. The writing's on the wall here. 75% of Americans polled agree that the Federal Reserve should be subject to the GAO audit that 1207 has in mind. If the legislation should fail, well, it seems to me that we will only further stimulate interest in transparency in the Fed, because people who up to this time hadn't had any interest in the issue will begin to wonder what could they be hiding. So I think it's probably best for the Fed simply to accept that the audit is coming. I think that would be a more dignified way of handling the situation than what we've seen from the Fed thus far, which has by and large been the approach of urging Americans, urging the peons who populate the country to quit pestering their betters with all these impertinent questions. I think the Fed should take to heart the words that Americans hear every time a new federal surveillance program is uncovered. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Thank you.